all discovered by one struggling family's desperate attempt to save their condemned home and the crumbling wall that would reveal America's most mysterious bank heist, preserved beneath their flooded basement for over a century. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The March rain pounded mercilessly against the windows of the old, colonial house as Michael Rivera descended the creaking wooden stairs into what had become his family's worst nightmare. At 42, he never imagined he'd be fighting to keep the dilapidated home where he, his wife Sophia, and their 3 children had hoped to build a better life. But here he stood, ankle-deep in murky water that had been rising for 5 days, clutching a condemnation notice that gave him exactly 72 hours to make the basement habitable or watch the city declare their only asset uninhabitable forever. The flooding had begun during the worst storm Philadelphia had witnessed in decades. What should have been minor seepage during heavy rain had transformed into catastrophe when the neighborhood's century-old drainage system failed catastrophically, sending thousands of gallons of water cascading into the basement of 1875 Chestnut Avenue. The historic home, built in 1867, had weathered over 150 years of Philadelphia winters, but it wasn't designed to withstand the infrastructure collapse that had overwhelmed their struggling neighborhood. Michael unfolded the crumpled condemnation notice from his jacket pocket, reading it for the 20th time that morning. The bureaucratic language was cold and impersonal, reducing his family's dreams to a series of housing code violations and structural concerns. Philadelphia Housing Authority. Property unsafe for habitation due to flooding damage, electrical hazards, and potential foundation compromise. Final notice. Compliance required within 72 hours or property will be condemned and demolished. The weight of those words pressed down on Michael like the gray March sky outside. He surveyed the basement that had once held so much promise, the space where he'd planned to build a playroom for the kids and a small workshop for himself. Now it was a disaster zone filled with murky water that carried the detritus of their modest possessions, floating toys, waterlogged furniture, and the scattered remains of the life they'd struggled to build. The irony was crushing. Michael had spent 15 years working construction, understanding foundations, drainage, and infrastructure better than most. He'd purchased this house precisely because he believed his skills could transform the neglected property into a home his family could be proud of. The $178,000 they'd paid had stretched their finances to the breaking point, but the opportunity seemed worth the risk. Now, just 8 months after moving in, they faced losing everything. The economic recession had hit their family hard. Construction projects had dried up, leaving Michael cobbling together part-time jobs that barely covered their $1,650 monthly mortgage. Sophia's job as a school cafeteria worker helped, but her $1,275 monthly income mostly went to utilities, food, and their youngest son's medical expenses. Their modest savings had been depleted by the down payment and unexpected repairs the house had required. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Dad, this pump isn't powerful enough," called out his teenage daughter Emma, who stood waist-deep in the flooded basement, trying to position a rental pump that seemed woefully inadequate for the task. The motor whined with effort, but the water level barely seemed to move. "We need something industrial grade, and we need to find where all this water is coming from." Emma was a good kid, 16 years old, with the kind of determined intelligence that reminded Michael of his own mother. Despite being on spring break, She'd volunteered to help rather than spending time with friends. Her younger brothers Lucas and Jason were staying with a neighbor while Michael and Sophia fought to save their home. Michael looked around the basement that had once held so much potential. The water was murky and filled with the debris of their accumulated belongings. Family photos documenting birthdays and holidays bobbed next to Christmas decorations they'd carefully stored. Tools that Michael had collected over his career floated like shipwreck artifacts. The water had likely ruined the furnace and water heater, creating yet another financial burden they couldn't afford. "Emma, we can't afford an industrial pump," Michael replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion and defeat. "The rental on this little one is already $65 a day. We can't get the water out with what we have. I'm afraid we're going to lose the house." He'd done the math obsessively over the past 5 days. The pump rental was already stretching their emergency credit card to the limit. The estimate for professional flood remediation was $15,000, more than their remaining credit and available cash combined. The electrical work needed to bring the basement up to code would cost at least $8,000 more. Even if they could somehow afford the immediate repairs, they'd still need to address the failing roof, the crumbling chimney, and a dozen other maintenance issues that had been accumulating since they purchased the property. The house at 1875 Chestnut Avenue had been built during Philadelphia's post-Civil War expansion, when the city's economy was booming and its population growing rapidly. Originally owned by the Harrington family, merchants who had prospered in the textile industry, the house had passed through several owners before falling into disrepair in the 1990s. When the Riveras purchased it, the property had been vacant for nearly 3 years, giving them a price they could almost afford in a neighborhood where most homes were well beyond their means. The neighborhood was changing rapidly. What had once been a working-class area was being discovered by young professionals and developers who saw potential in the historic architecture. 3 houses on their block had been purchased by investment companies in the past year, renovated with high-end finishes, and flipped for twice what the Riveras had paid for their home. Michael had watched the transformation with a mixture of admiration for the craftsmanship and anxiety about rising property taxes that would further strain their budget. "Dad, there might be assistance programs for flood victims," Emma suggested hopefully. "Maybe the city has resources we don't know about." Michael shook his head, having already explored every available option with the thoroughness of someone fighting for survival. "I've called everyone, Emma. FEMA says this doesn't qualify as a federal disaster because it's not widespread enough. The city says their emergency funds are exhausted from the bigger floods downtown last month. The Red Cross can provide temporary shelter, but not home repairs. And our insurance." He gestured helplessly at the water surrounding them. "Apparently, this kind of flooding isn't covered under our policy." The insurance situation was particularly infuriating. Michael had carefully reviewed their homeowner's policy before purchasing, ensuring they had what seemed like adequate coverage. But the fine print contained exclusions that he hadn't fully understood. The policy covered flooding from natural disasters, but specifically excluded flooding caused by municipal infrastructure failure. The city's drainage system collapse was considered an act of government rather than a natural disaster, creating a legal loophole that left the Riveras without coverage for exactly the kind of catastrophe they faced. Michael had spent hours on the phone with the insurance company, explaining their situation to representatives who seemed sympathetic but powerless to help. The claims adjuster who'd visited had been apologetic but firm. Municipal infrastructure failures were explicitly excluded under standard homeowners policies. If Michael wanted that kind of protection, he would have needed separate flood insurance, which cost hundreds of dollars annually and had a 30-day waiting period before taking effect. "The housing inspector is coming back tomorrow morning," Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion. "If this basement isn't dry and the electrical system isn't safe, they'll condemn the house. After that, we're looking at demolition." He'd met the inspector twice already, a tired-looking woman named Janet Patel, who'd been doing this job for 12 years and had seen every kind of housing disaster Philadelphia could produce. Patel had been professional but clear about the stakes. The city couldn't allow families to live in houses with compromised electrical systems and ongoing flooding. If the Riveras couldn't resolve the problems within the specified time frame, the house would be declared uninhabitable and scheduled for demolition. The prospect of demolition was almost worse than foreclosure. At least with foreclosure, the house might be sold to someone who could afford to restore it. With condemnation and demolition, the family would lose their down payment and still be responsible for the mortgage on a house that no longer existed. The debt would follow them for years, making it nearly impossible to find another home. Emma stopped working with the pump and looked at her father with the kind of maturity that children sometimes display in times of crisis. "Dad, there has to be something we can do. This house probably has history. Maybe there's something special about it that could help us." Michael appreciated her optimism, but he understood the harsh realities of urban renewal better than a teenager could. The city of Philadelphia was dealing with aging infrastructure throughout its historic neighborhoods, struggling with limited budgets and an overwhelming number of problems. Condemning flood-damaged houses was often easier and cheaper than helping homeowners navigate complex restoration processes, especially when those homeowners lacked financial resources to hire lawyers or advocates. "Mom always says this basement feels different," Emma continued, unwilling to give up. "She keeps talking about how the foundation looks unusual, like it was built for something else before it became a house." Michael had heard Sophia make these comments many times during their short ownership of the house. His practical-minded wife, who usually focused on immediate concerns like grocery budgets and school schedules, had developed an unexpected fascination with the basement's construction. She often remarked that the stone walls seemed too elaborate for a residential foundation, pointing out details in the masonry that suggested professional construction techniques from another era. "Different how?" Michael asked, finding himself curious despite their dire circumstances. "She says the basement is too deep for a house built in the 1860s, and the stonework looks more like what you'd find in a commercial building than a home," Emma explained. "She's been researching the neighborhood's history and thinks this area used to have businesses before it became residential." The theory wasn't entirely far-fetched. Their neighborhood had been close to Philadelphia's financial district during the mid-19th century, with banks, mercantile establishments, and other businesses scattered throughout the area. Many residential streets had been developed on land that had previously housed commercial operations, often incorporating foundations or structural elements from earlier buildings. Michael had noticed some unusual features in the basement's construction. Himself, the stone walls were built with a precision typically found in commercial buildings, using carefully fitted limestone blocks rather than the rough fieldstone common in residential foundations of the era. The ceiling was unusually high, nearly 10 feet, and the floor had been laid with thick slate tiles that suggested the space had been designed for heavy use. "Your mom might be right about the construction," Michael acknowledged, finding himself examining the basement walls with renewed interest. "But even if this place has historical significance, that doesn't solve our immediate problem. We need dry floors and working electricity, not historical curiosities." Even as he said it, Michael found himself looking more carefully at the basement's construction. The water level had dropped slightly since they'd started pumping, revealing stone walls that did seem unusually sophisticated for a residential foundation. The stonework was precise and professional, with carefully fitted joints and what appeared to be iron reinforcement rods set into the mortar. The construction resembled the historic bank buildings downtown more than the other residential basements he'd worked in during his construction career. "Maybe we should focus on getting this water out first, then worry about historical mysteries," he said, trying to redirect Emma's attention to their practical challenges while simultaneously wondering if Sophia's theories might somehow be relevant to their current crisis. They worked in silence for the next hour, taking turns operating the pump and hauling buckets of water up the basement stairs. The work was exhausting and seemingly endless. For every bucket they removed, more water seemed to seep in from somewhere. Not enough to raise the level significantly, but enough to make their progress frustratingly slow. Michael's back ached from the constant lifting and carrying, and his hands were raw from gripping the bucket handles. The basement held 8 months of family life, and watching their possessions float in the murky water was heartbreaking. He saw Emma's first science fair trophy bobbing near the stairs, Lucas's collection of model trains floating past, and the Christmas decorations they'd carefully stored after celebrating their first holiday in the house. Most painful were the family photographs, albums chronicling their life together, likely ruined beyond salvage. As the afternoon light began to fade, Michael realized they'd made minimal progress. The water level had dropped perhaps 6 inches, but the basement was still largely flooded, and the electrical systems remained dangerously submerged. The furnace, water heater, and electrical panel were all below the water line, creating safety hazards that would need to be addressed before the house could be considered habitable again. With less than 60 hours remaining until the housing authority's deadline, Michael was beginning to accept that the house his family had stretched their finances to purchase was about to be lost forever. The arithmetic was brutal and unavoidable. He simply didn't have the money to hire professional water removal services, replace the damaged electrical systems, and address all the other issues required to satisfy the city's requirements. As darkness fell outside, Sophia returned from her shift at the school cafeteria, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes still holding a determined spark. She'd been working double shifts to bring in extra money, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. The toll of their financial struggles showed in the new lines around her eyes and the gray strands appearing in her dark hair. "Any progress?" she asked, setting down a bag of groceries she'd purchased with her employee discount. "Not enough," Michael replied honestly. "The pump is too small, and the water keeps coming in. We're fighting a losing battle." Sophia kicked off her shoes and rolled up her pants, preparing to join them in the flooded basement, despite having been on her feet for 12 hours already. Her dedication to their family had never wavered, even when Michael's employment had become unstable and their financial situation precarious. "We're not giving up," she said firmly. "This is our home, and we're going to fight for it until the very last minute." As Sophia descended the basement stairs, Emma called out from the far corner where she'd been working. "Mom, Dad, I think there's something you need to see." She was standing near the rear wall of the basement, where the receding water had revealed what appeared to be a section of floor that didn't match the rest of the basement. The stone pattern was different, where most of the floor was laid with uniform slate tiles. This area showed a rectangular outline of different stones fitted together in a way that suggested they could be removed. Michael waded over to where Emma was standing, his heart racing with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The rectangular outline was clearly artificial, about 4 feet long and 3 feet wide, with stones that were noticeably different from the surrounding foundation. The joints around the rectangle were filled with a different type of mortar, suggesting that this section had been installed or modified separately from the original construction. Sophia was right, he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder and growing excitement. There is something unusual about this basement. Emma knelt in the shallow water, running her hands along the edges of the rectangular outline. Dad, this looks like some kind of access panel or door. Maybe there's a room or storage area underneath. Michael's mind raced with possibilities. If Sophia was right about their basement having been part of a commercial building before the house was constructed, this rectangular outline might be evidence of that earlier purpose. Could there be a hidden space beneath their foundation? Perhaps a storage room or vault from whatever business had occupied the site before the house was built? But he also understood that discovering hidden rooms in their basement wouldn't solve the immediate problem of flood damage and electrical hazards. Whatever was beneath those stones had been there for decades, possibly over a century. It would still be there after the city condemned their house and scheduled it for demolition. Emma, even if there's something down there, I don't see how. It helps us, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Despite his practical concerns, he found himself hoping that whatever lay beneath the mysterious stones might somehow provide the miracle they desperately needed. Dad, what if it's something valuable or historically important? Emma persisted, her teenage optimism undiminished by their dire circumstances. What if it's something that could help us save the house? Sophia joined them at the rectangular outline, her eyes widening as she examined the stonework. I knew there was something special about this basement, she whispered, a vindicated smile briefly lighting her tired face. The construction always seemed too elaborate for a simple house foundation. Michael looked at the mysterious rectangular outline in his basement floor, then at the condemnation notice that would make his family homeless in less than 60 hours. The flooding crisis that had seemed like an insurmountable disaster was suddenly charged with unexpected possibility. And with time running out before the housing authority's final inspection, whatever was hidden beneath their basement floor might be their last hope. The failing house that had seemed like an overwhelming burden was about to reveal secrets that would change everything the Rivera family thought they knew about their home, their neighborhood's history, and the architectural legacy that had been hidden beneath their feet for generations. Michael's hands trembled as he reached for his crowbar, knowing that whatever they discovered next would either save their family's future or confirm that they had lost everything. Michael's hands trembled as he and Emma worked to clear the remaining water from around the mysterious rectangular outline in their basement floor. The March evening had settled in completely now, and the single work light they had brought cast eerie shadows across the stone walls that Sophia had always insisted held secrets. What they were about to uncover would either vindicate his wife's theories about their home's hidden history or prove to be another heartbreaking dead end in their desperate fight to save the house. Dad, these stones definitely move, Emma said, her voice tight with excitement and effort as she worked her fingers around the edges of the rectangular section. Look, this whole section is separate from the rest of the floor. It's like a puzzle piece that's been fitted into place. The stones that formed the rectangular outline were indeed different from the surrounding basement floor. Where the regular foundation used uniform slate tiles laid in a standard pattern, this section consisted of carefully cut limestone blocks fitted together with precision that spoke of professional construction. The mortar around the edges was a different color and texture, suggesting it had been installed or modified at a different time than the original foundation. Michael knelt beside Emma in the shallow water that remained, running his fingers along the joints between the stones. Sophia had been right about so many things regarding their house's construction, and now he was beginning to understand why she'd spent so many evenings down here, measuring walls and examining stonework with the intensity of an archaeologist. The evidence had been here all along, hidden beneath months of stored boxes and family belongings. Sophia always said this basement was built like a commercial building, he murmured, more to himself than to Emma. She used to suggest our house was sitting on top of some kind of bank vault or merchant storage, but I never took her seriously. The theory had seemed like one of Sophia's harmless obsessions, the kind of historical speculation that history enthusiasts love to pursue, but that had little bearing on practical daily life. Michael had always been focused on more immediate concerns, finding steady work, keeping up with mortgage payments, and later, dealing with the flooding crisis. He'd never had time for theories about 19th century construction, techniques, or the industrial history of their neighborhood. But now, faced with the loss of everything they'd built together, Michael found himself desperately hoping that Sophia's theories might somehow provide the salvation they needed. If the house did indeed sit on historically significant foundations, there might be preservation programs or heritage designations that could protect it from condemnation and demolition. "How do we get these stones up?" Emma asked, examining the tight joints between the limestone blocks. Michael looked around the basement for tools that might help with their investigation. Most of his equipment was either submerged or damaged by the flooding, but he spotted his old pry bar hanging on a pegboard that had remained above the waterline. "Let's try this," he said, retrieving the pry bar. "But be careful. If there's really something underneath here, we don't want to damage it." Michael positioned the pry bar along the edge of one of the limestone blocks, working carefully to avoid scarring the stone or damaging whatever might lie beneath. The first block resisted his efforts, held in place by over a century of settled mortar and the weight of the surrounding stones. "It's moving," Michael said, his voice strained with effort. "I can feel it starting to loosen." The first stone came free with a grinding sound that echoed through the basement like a door opening after decades of disuse. Beneath the limestone block was a dark space that seemed to extend further down than any of them had expected. Michael shone his flashlight into the opening, revealing what appeared to be a carefully constructed chamber beneath their basement floor. "Emma, there's definitely a room down there," Michael said, his voice hushed with amazement. "And it looks dry, completely preserved from the flooding." Emma's eyes widened as she peered into the opening her father had created. "Dad, this is incredible. We have to get more stones up to see what's down there." Sophia returned from putting away groceries and stood transfixed at the sight of the opening in their basement floor. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew there was something special about this house." They worked feverishly to remove more of the limestone blocks, driven by a mixture of curiosity and the desperate hope that whatever lay hidden beneath their basement might somehow help with their dire situation. Each stone they removed revealed more of the chamber below, and with each revelation, it became clear that Sophia had been absolutely right about their house's unusual history. The chamber was approximately 10 feet long and 8 feet wide, with a vaulted brick ceiling that demonstrated professional construction techniques. The space had been carefully sealed and appeared to have remained dry despite the flooding above. But what dominated the chamber was an object that none of them had been prepared to find. "That's a bank vault door," Sophia gasped, her voice filled with awe. An actual 19th century bank vault door. The object in the chamber was indeed a vault door, unlike anything Michael had ever seen outside of a museum. This was clearly a piece of 19th century banking equipment, built with heavy iron and brass construction that characterized high-security storage from the era when their house was built. The door was approximately 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide, with massive brass hinges and an elaborate locking mechanism that featured multiple dials and keyholes. But the vault door's presence in the chamber raised immediate questions that none of them could answer. How had such a sophisticated piece of banking equipment ended up in an underground room beneath a residential house? When had it been placed there, and why? And perhaps most importantly, what lay behind the door that had required such elaborate security measures? "This is impossible," Michael said, though the evidence before his eyes made denial difficult. "How do you get a bank vault door into an underground chamber beneath a house? And why would anyone want to?" Emma was already climbing down into the chamber, her teenage fearlessness overcoming any concerns about the safety or wisdom of exploring the hidden space. "Dad, Mom, you need to see this. There's an inscription on the wall, and there's something behind the vault door." Michael's practical caution warred with his growing excitement about what they'd discovered. The chamber had clearly been sealed for decades, possibly since the house was built, and there was no immediate danger in exploring it. But he also understood that whatever they found down there would complicate their already desperate situation. With the housing authority, "Be careful, Emma," he called, as he lowered himself into the chamber using the old wooden ladder that had apparently been installed when the space was originally constructed. "We don't know how stable any of this is." The chamber felt remarkably dry and well-preserved, considering its age and the flooding that had affected the basement above. The walls showed evidence of careful waterproofing, with what appeared to be tar or pitch applied to the brick surfaces to prevent moisture infiltration. The floor was paved with the same limestone blocks they'd removed from the access panel, creating a stable surface that had clearly been designed for security. But it was the vault door itself that commanded their attention. The heavy iron door was marked with faded lettering that had once identified its ownership and purpose. Michael could make out partial words that appeared to spell First National, and what looked like a banking emblem, though the paint was too faded to read completely. "Michael, look at this inscription," Sophia said, pointing to the wall beside the vault door. There, carved directly into the brick, were words and a date: the Committee of Safety, June 1871. Below this inscription was a list of names: William Harrison, Jonathan Pembroke, Samuel Whitman. Michael approached the vault door with growing amazement and apprehension. The discovery of an underground chamber had been surprising enough, but finding a 19th century bank vault raised questions that went far beyond architectural curiosities. This was clearly something that had been deliberately hidden, preserved with the same care and attention that had gone into constructing the chamber itself. "Sophia, Emma, these names must be important," he observed, examining the carved inscription. "And the Committee of Safety sounds like some kind of organization. This wasn't just random construction. This was planned and executed by people who wanted to hide something valuable." The inscription suggested that the underground chamber dated back to 1871, just a few years after their house was supposedly built. This timeline aligned with a period of significant financial instability in American history. The aftermath of the Civil War had created economic turbulence, with bank failures and financial panics occurring regularly throughout the 1870s. "Dad, do you think we can open the vault?" Emma asked, her curiosity clearly overcoming any concerns about disturbing what might be historically significant artifacts. Michael examined the vault door more closely. The locking mechanism was sophisticated for its era, a combination dial, surrounded by smaller keyholes and auxiliary locking points. Despite its age, the mechanism appeared remarkably well preserved, though he had no idea whether it could still be operated after being sealed for so long. "I don't know if we can open it without the combination," he replied. These old vault doors were designed to be virtually impenetrable without the correct sequence. Sophia had moved to examine the area around the vault door more carefully. "Michael, look at this," she said, pointing to a small metal plate affixed to the wall beside the door. The plate appeared to contain numbers and letters, arranged in what might be a code or instruction. 7R22L14R9, Sophia read aloud. Could this be the combination? Michael's heart raced as he considered the possibility. If the plate did indeed contain the combination to the vault, then whatever had been stored inside might still be accessible. But he also understood that opening the vault would cross a threshold from discovering historical architecture to actively engaging with whatever had been hidden by the mysterious Committee of Safety in 1871. Should we try it? He asked, looking to Sophia for guidance. As always in their marriage, her historical knowledge balanced his practical caution, creating a partnership that had weathered numerous challenges. Michael, this could be important, not just for us, but for understanding the history of this neighborhood and maybe even the city, Sophia replied. I think we have to try. With trembling hands, Michael approached the vault door's combination dial. The mechanism was stiff from decades of disuse, but it moved when he applied steady pressure. Following the sequence on the metal plate, he turned the dial right to 7, then left past 7 to 22, then right to 14, and finally left to 9. As he completed the sequence, they heard a distinct clicking sound from within the door's mechanism. Michael held his breath as he grasped the large brass handle and pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of metal that had remained stationary for over a century, the vault door began to move. The hinges protested but functioned, allowing the heavy door to swing outward into the chamber. As it opened, the beam of Michael's flashlight revealed a space beyond, another room, smaller than the antechamber, but filled with objects that gleamed in the artificial light. "Oh my God," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's still here. After all this time, it's still here." The vault contained rows of wooden shelves, each holding metal boxes, leather-bound ledgers, and what appeared to be stacks of documents wrapped in oilcloth for preservation. But most striking were the canvas bags arranged on the lower shelves, each marked with faded but still visible printing that read, First National Bank of Philadelphia, 1871. Emma stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. "Dad, Mom, are those?" "Money bags," Michael confirmed, his voice tight with disbelief. Actual 19th century bank money bags. The implications were staggering. If the canvas bags contained what their markings suggested, then what they discovered wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was evidence of what might have been one of the largest financial crimes in Philadelphia's banking history. Sophia carefully lifted one of the canvas bags, testing its weight. "Michael, this is heavy, I think. I think these might actually contain money." With utmost care, Sophia untied the drawstring that had kept the bag sealed for over a century. As she opened it, they all gasped at the contents. Gold coins, dozens of them, each bearing the unmistakable imagery of 19th century American currency. Eagles, liberty heads, and denomination markings gleamed in the flashlight beam, preserved in remarkable condition by the dry, sealed environment of the vault. "These are $20 gold pieces," Sophia said, her voice hushed with awe. "Double eagles." They were the highest denomination coins in circulation during this period. Each one contains nearly an ounce of gold. Michael's construction background had taught him enough about precious metals to understand the implications. Gold was currently valued at over $1,800 per ounce, meaning that each coin might be worth far more than its face value, both for its gold content and its historical significance. To collectors, "There must be dozens of bags," Emma whispered, counting the canvas sacks visible on the shelves. "Dad, Mom, what does this mean? Why would all this be hidden under our house?" Michael's mind raced with possibilities. The date on the inscription, 1871, coincided with a significant event in American financial history that Sophia had mentioned during their research into the house's origins. The Great Chicago Fire of October 1871 had triggered financial panic throughout the nation's banking system, with multiple bank failures and economic instability that affected major cities across the country. Sophia, could this be connected to the bank panic of 1871? He asked, recalling their previous conversations about Philadelphia's financial history. Sophia nodded slowly, her historian's mind clearly processing the possibilities. The First National Bank of Philadelphia survived the panic, but many others didn't. There were rumors of misappropriated funds, of bank directors who protected assets during the crisis through questionable means. You think this was stolen? Emma asked, the excitement in her voice tinged with concern. Like actual bank robbery money? Not a robbery in the traditional sense, Sophia clarified, examining one of the leather-bound ledgers she'd retrieved from a shelf. This looks more like an inside job. Bank directors or officials who moved assets from the bank to protect them during the financial panic, creating this hidden vault beneath what would later become a residential neighborhood. Michael carefully examined one of the gold coins, feeling its weight and solidity in his palm. The discovery represented both tremendous opportunity and serious ethical questions. If these assets had indeed been misappropriated from a bank during the 1871 panic, did they still legally belong to the bank's successor institutions? Did the Rivera family have any claim to treasure found on their own property? And perhaps most importantly, could they use this discovery to save their house without getting themselves into legal trouble? As Michael was contemplating these questions, Emma had moved to examine the documents wrapped in oilcloth. "Mom, Dad, you need to see these," she said, carefully unfolding papers that had been preserved for over a century. The documents appeared to be letters and meeting minutes from the mysterious Committee of Safety mentioned in the wall inscription. As Sophia read through them, her eyes widened with understanding. "These aren't bank robbers," she said with growing excitement. "They were trying to protect depositors' money during the panic. Listen to this. In light of the imminent collapse of financial institutions throughout the nation, and with no guarantee of government intervention to protect the savings of ordinary citizens, the committee resolves to secure selected assets in a location unknown to those who would seize them for speculative advantage." The letter was signed by the same three names carved into the chamber wall: William Harrison, Jonathan Pembroke, and Samuel Whitman, who appeared to have been bank directors or officials who feared that powerful financial interests would take advantage of the panic to seize smaller banks' assets at pennies on the dollar. They were hiding the money to protect it, Michael realized, not to steal it for themselves. "And look at this," Sophia continued, examining another document. "They intended to return the assets once the financial crisis had passed, but something must have happened to them. There's a contingency plan here for what should happen if they were prevented from completing their mission, including instructions for eventually returning the funds to rightful depositors." Michael carefully replaced the gold coin in its canvas bag, understanding that their discovery represented far more than potential financial windfall. It was a physical connection to a tumultuous period in American financial history, when ordinary citizens and smaller banks were often at the mercy of powerful financial interests during times of economic crisis. "What do we do now?" Emma asked, the question hanging in the air between them. Michael looked around the underground vault that had protected its secrets for over 150 years, at the gold coins and historical documents that might represent their family's financial salvation or a legal nightmare, and at the condemnation notice that still threatened to make them homeless in less than 48 hours. "First, we document everything," he said, the practical builder in him asserting itself. We photograph the vault, the coins, the documents. Everything exactly as we found it. Then we need expert advice before we do anything else. The underground chamber that had hidden its secrets for over a century was about to test whether the Rivera family had the wisdom to handle discoveries that came with both tremendous opportunities and serious responsibilities. The flooding crisis that had threatened to destroy their home had revealed something far more valuable than architectural curiosities, a direct connection to history and potentially the resources to secure their future. As they carefully cataloged the contents of the vault, the Riveras understood that the next 48 hours would determine not just whether they could save their home, but whether they could honor the intentions of the long-dead Committee of Safety, who had created this remarkable time capsule beneath their basement floor. Michael barely slept that night, his mind racing with the implications of what they had discovered in the underground chamber. The March wind rattled the windows of their old colonial house as he sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by photographs they'd taken of the vault contents, trying to piece together a story that had been hidden for over 150 years. With less than 36 hours remaining before the housing authority's final inspection, he needed to understand not just what they'd found, but what it meant for his family's future and his own moral obligations. The documents spread across the kitchen table told a complex story of financial panic, public trust, and ethical decision-making that resonated deeply with the Rivera's current crisis. The letters and meeting minutes from the Committee of Safety weren't just historical artifacts, they were a window into the lives of ordinary Philadelphians who had entrusted their savings to banks during a time of economic uncertainty. Michael found himself studying the names of individual depositors listed in the ledgers, the amounts they'd saved, understanding that each entry represented a family's security and dreams for the future. Jacob Holloway, carpenter, $87.50. Maria Giordano, seamstress, $42.75. William Fletcher, blacksmith, $103.25. The list went on for pages, representing the backbone of Philadelphia's working class during one of the most tumultuous periods in the nation's economic history. These weren't wealthy industrialists or financial speculators. They were immigrants and working-class Americans who had entrusted their hard-earned savings to the banking system, only to face the prospect of losing everything during the panic of 1871. The parallels to his family's current situation were striking. Ordinary people caught in financial circumstances beyond their control, their security threatened by larger economic forces they couldn't influence. But it was the broader historical context that truly made Michael understand the significance of their discovery. The early 1870s had been a period of unprecedented financial instability in American banking, with the aftereffects of the Civil War and rampant speculation creating a system vulnerable to collapse. The Great Chicago Fire of October 1871 had been the triggering event, causing a cascading series of bank failures that spread from the Midwest to the East Coast. Michael had spent hours the previous evening researching this historical period online, trying to understand the context that had led to the creation of the hidden vault beneath their home. What he'd learned had transformed his understanding of the discovery from a simple treasure story into something far more complex and morally nuanced. The Committee of Safety mentioned in the inscription carved into the chamber wall appeared to have been a small group of bank officials who had acted outside normal channels to protect depositors' funds. The committee's formation had been in direct response to rumors that powerful financial interests in New York and Philadelphia were preparing to exploit the panic by forcing smaller banks into insolvency, then purchasing their assets at pennies on the dollar. According to the documents they'd found, William Harrison, Jonathan Pembroke, and Samuel Whitman had been directors at the First National Bank of Philadelphia who became aware of an impending run on their institution. rather than allowing the bank to fail, losing their depositors' savings in the process. They had secretly removed a portion of the bank's gold reserves and essential documents, hiding them in the specially constructed vault beneath what would later become the Rivera family's home. Their plan, detailed in meeting minutes dated September 1871, had been to return the assets once the financial crisis had passed, ensuring that ordinary depositors would recover their savings rather than seeing them absorbed by larger financial institutions. But something had clearly prevented them from completing this plan. The gold and documents had remained hidden for over 150 years, suggesting that Harrison, Pembroke, and Whitman had faced consequences for their unauthorized actions. Michael had discovered newspaper accounts from November 1871, reporting that all three men had been arrested on charges of embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. The articles described them as conspirators against financial stability who had removed bank assets for unknown purposes, suggesting that their true intentions had never been made public. Subsequent reports indicated that Harrison had died in prison awaiting trial, while Pembroke and Whitman had received lengthy sentences despite their claims that they had acted to protect depositors. The timing of the home's construction suddenly made sense in this context. Property records showed that the house at 1875 Chestnut Avenue had been built in 1873, 2 years after the Committee of Safety had created their hidden vault. The construction must have been designed specifically to conceal the underground chamber, creating a residential facade over what had been intended as a temporary hiding place for the bank's assets. As the morning light began to filter through the kitchen windows, Michael realized that he needed expert advice to navigate the complex legal, historical, and ethical questions raised by their discovery. The housing authority deadline was approaching rapidly, and he couldn't afford to make decisions based on incomplete information or emotional impulses. "You haven't slept," Sophia observed, entering the kitchen still wearing her robe, her voice concerned but understanding. She had spent much of the night researching on her laptop, searching for information about historical banking laws and property rights related to found treasures. "How could I?" Michael replied with a tired smile. "We've got gold coins from the 1870s in our basement, a hidden bank vault that was never supposed to be found, and less than 36 hours to save our house from condemnation." "I've been thinking," Sophia said, pouring coffee for both of them. "We need to talk to Professor Abernathy at Temple University. He's an expert on Philadelphia's financial history and might be able to help us understand the legal implications of what we found." Michael nodded in agreement. "And we should probably consult a lawyer who specializes in property rights and historical artifacts. This isn't just about finding treasure, it's about doing the right thing with something that has historical significance." They decided to reach out to Dr. James Abernathy, a prominent historian at Temple University who had written extensively about Philadelphia's financial development, and Rachel Goldman, an attorney who specialized in cultural heritage law and had handled several cases involving historical artifacts found on private property. If anyone could help them understand the significance of their discovery and navigate its legal complexities, it would be these experts. As Sophia made the calls, Michael descended to the basement to check on the water level and the vault. The small pump had continued working through the night, and to his relief, the flooding had receded significantly. The electrical systems were still compromised, but the immediate threat of rising water had diminished. The access to the underground chamber remained secure, visible only to someone who knew exactly what to look for among the stone patterns of the basement floor. Emma joined him in the basement, her eyes bright despite the early hour. Like her parents, she had slept little, the excitement of their discovery keeping her mind racing with possibilities. "Dad, I've been researching the Panic of 1871 for a history project," she said, her voice animated with the thrill of connection. "The textbooks never mentioned anything about bank directors hiding assets to protect them. This could change how people understand that whole period of history." Michael was struck by his daughter's perspective. While he had been focused primarily on the immediate practical implications of their discovery, whether it could help them save their home, Emma had immediately grasped its broader historical significance. Her enthusiasm reminded him that what they had found wasn't just potentially valuable in monetary terms. It was a piece of forgotten history that deserved to be understood and preserved. "You're right, Emma," he acknowledged. "This isn't just about us and our house. It's about all those people listed in the ledgers who thought their savings were lost forever. It's about 3 men who risked everything to protect ordinary people's money during a financial crisis." By mid-morning, both Dr. Abernathy and Attorney Goldman had agreed to visit the house immediately, recognizing the urgency of the Rivera's situation. The Housing Authority inspection was scheduled for the following day, giving them precious little time to determine how to proceed. Dr. James Abernathy arrived first, a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and an air of contained excitement that became palpable when Michael showed him the entrance to the underground chamber. As a historian specializing in 19th-century banking practices, he immediately grasped the significance of what the Riveras had discovered. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Abernathy breathed as he examined the vault door with its first national bank markings. "I've studied the Panic of 1871 for 30 years, and there have always been rumors about missing bank assets that were never recovered. But to find actual physical evidence, preserved in this condition," the historian carefully documented everything, photographing the vault, the gold coins, and especially the documents left by the Committee of Safety. His expertise allowed him to place their discovery in its proper historical context, confirming much of what the family had pieced together from their own research. "These men were indeed painted as criminals," Dr. Abernathy explained, examining the letters with gloved hands. "But these documents suggest something quite different, that they were attempting to protect their depositors from what they saw as predatory financial practices by larger institutions." The parallels to modern financial crises were striking. Dr. Abernathy explained how the Panic of 1871 had featured many of the same elements as more recent economic downturns: rampant speculation, insufficient regulation, and ordinary people bearing the brunt of the consequences, while powerful interests often emerged unscathed or even strengthened. "What Harrison, Pembroke, and Whitman did was technically illegal," the historian continued. "They removed bank assets without authorization. But their intentions, at least according to these documents, were ultimately to protect their depositors' interests during a time when there was no federal deposit insurance, no government bailouts for ordinary citizens." Rachel Goldman arrived as Dr. Abernathy was completing his initial assessment. The attorney was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had built her practice around the intersection of property law and cultural heritage. After viewing the underground chamber and its contents, she gathered the family in the living room to discuss the legal implications of their discovery. "The legal situation here is complex," Goldman explained, "but not necessarily as dire as you might fear. There are several principles at work that could actually work in your favor." She outlined how the doctrine of treasure trove might apply to their situation. The legal principle that treasures found hidden on private property, with no clear owner to claim them, may belong to the finder or the property owner, depending on specific circumstances. "The fact that these assets have been hidden for over 150 years works in your favor," Goldman continued. The original bank has gone through multiple mergers and acquisitions over the decades, making any direct claim of ownership difficult to establish. Additionally, statutes of limitations on any crimes committed in 1871 expired long ago, meaning there's no criminal liability to consider. However, Goldman emphasized that the historical and cultural significance of the discovery created both opportunities and obligations. This isn't just gold coins, it's a historical archive that documents a previously unknown chapter in American financial history that creates certain ethical considerations that go beyond strict legal requirements. The attorney suggested a balanced approach, one that would respect the historical significance of the find, while also acknowledging the Rivera's rights as property owners who had discovered the vault. The gold itself has significant value, both as precious metal and as historical artifacts. But the documents may be even more valuable from a historical perspective. As Dr. Abernathy and Attorney Goldman continued their assessment, the Riveras were startled by a knock at the front door. Michael opened it to find Janet Patel, the Housing Authority inspector, standing on their porch a day earlier than scheduled. "Mr. Rivera," she said, her expression professional but not unkind. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on your progress with the remediation. Has the flooding situation improved?" Michael's heart sank. They weren't prepared for an early inspection, not with experts still examining the underground chamber and no decisions yet made about how to proceed. But he also recognized an opportunity to potentially gain more time. "Miss Patel, something unexpected has happened," he said carefully. "We've discovered what appears to be a historically significant structure beneath our basement floor. We have experts here right now assessing it." Patel's professional demeanor gave way to surprised curiosity. "What kind of structure?" Michael invited her in, introducing her to Dr. Abernathy and Attorney Goldman. The historian quickly explained the significance of what they'd discovered, his academic credentials lending immediate credibility to the situation. "This is a historically significant find," Dr. Abernathy explained. "A previously unknown bank vault from the panic of 1871, with intact documents that could change our understanding of that financial crisis. It would be a tremendous loss to Philadelphia's historical record if this house were condemned before proper archaeological documentation could take place." Janet Patel listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. As a housing inspector, her primary concern was safety and code compliance. But she was also a lifelong Philadelphian with respect for the city's rich history. "The flooding is the immediate concern," she said after a moment. "Has that situation improved?" "Significantly," Michael confirmed, leading her to the basement to show the progress they'd made. The water level had receded considerably, though the electrical system still needed inspection and likely repair. After examining the basement and being shown the entrance to the underground chamber, Patel made a decision that gave the Riveras precious breathing room. "Given the historical significance of this discovery, I can recommend a 14-day extension on the condemnation notice," she said. "That would give you time for proper assessment and documentation of the historical site. However, you'll still need to address the electrical hazards and complete the flood remediation within that time frame." The extension was a reprieve, but not a solution. They still needed funds to complete the necessary repairs, and they had yet to determine how to proceed with the vault contents. But the additional time would allow them to make these decisions thoughtfully rather than in a desperate rush. After Patel left, Dr. Abernathy made a suggestion that caught everyone by surprise. "The university has funds for the preservation of significant historical discoveries," he explained. "Given the importance of these documents and artifacts, I believe I could arrange for a preservation grant that would cover the immediate repairs needed to save this house from condemnation. You could do that? Michael asked, hardly daring to hope. The alternative would be losing access to this historical site completely, Dr. Abernathy replied. From an academic perspective, preserving this discovery is worth far more than the cost of basement repairs and electrical work. Attorney Goldman nodded in agreement. And in terms of the vault contents, I would recommend a balanced approach. The historical documents should be preserved in an appropriate academic or museum setting, with the Rivera family credited as the discoverers. And the gold? Sophia asked, the question they'd all been considering since the discovery. That's where we can create a fair compromise, Goldman suggested. Some portion should be preserved for historical exhibition alongside the documents. But there's a strong legal case that as the property owners who discovered this treasure, you have rights to a significant portion of the financial value. The prospect of financial relief from their discovery was tempting, but Michael and Sophia exchanged a look that reflected their shared values. Throughout their marriage, they had taught their children that integrity mattered more than money, that doing the right thing sometimes required personal sacrifice. What would be the right thing to do? Michael asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on his mind since they'd first opened the vault. These assets were meant to be returned to depositors who lost their savings during the financial panic. Just because that was 150 years ago, does that change our obligation? Dr. Abernathy considered the question thoughtfully. The depositors themselves are long gone, as are their direct descendants in most cases. But the committee's intention to protect ordinary citizens from financial predation, that principle remains relevant today. What if, Sophia suggested, we used a portion of the value to establish a fund that continues that mission? Something that helps families facing financial hardship or housing insecurity in Philadelphia. The idea resonated with everyone present. A fund that would honor the original intention of the Committee of Safety while addressing contemporary needs, would create meaning from their discovery beyond personal gain. By evening, a plan had begun to take shape. The university would provide an emergency preservation grant to cover the immediate repairs needed to save the Rivera's home, allowing them to address the flooding damage and electrical hazards before the extended deadline. In exchange, the family would provide the university with exclusive access to document and study the underground chamber and its historical contents. The documents and a representative selection of the gold coins would be preserved in the university's archives, with plans for a special exhibition that would tell the story of the Committee of Safety and their efforts to protect ordinary depositors. During the Panic of 1871, the Rivera family would be prominently credited with the discovery, with Emma invited to participate in the historical research as an intern, an opportunity that thrilled the history-loving teenager. As for the remaining gold, Attorney Goldman would establish a trust that would serve two purposes, providing for the Rivera family's financial security, including funds to fully restore their historic home, and creating a foundation that would support Philadelphia families facing housing insecurity and financial hardship. The Committee of Safety protected our own, 1871. Michael read aloud from the inscription in the underground chamber, standing there with Sophia and Emma as they considered the plan they had developed. I think they would approve of how we're honoring their legacy. Sophia squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the same mixture of relief, pride, and purpose that he felt. We're not just saving our home, she said softly. We're continuing what they started, protecting ordinary families from financial catastrophe. Emma looked around the underground chamber that had preserved its secrets for over 150 years. At the vault door that symbolized both security and the lengths to which some would go to protect others during times of crisis. "Dad, Mom," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes the biggest treasures aren't the ones that are hidden. They're the ones that are shared." As the Rivera family ascended from the underground chamber that evening, they understood that the flooding crisis that had threatened to destroy their home had instead revealed something far more valuable than gold coins, a connection to history, a sense of purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places, including beneath your own feet. The next 14 days unfolded in a whirlwind of activity that transformed not just the Rivera family's home but their understanding of their place in Philadelphia's history. The University Preservation Grant arrived within 48 hours, providing the immediate funds needed to address the flooding damage and electrical hazards that had threatened their home with condemnation. Professional remediation crews worked alongside Michael, who put his construction experience to good use directing efforts to protect both the historic structure of the house and the underground chamber that had become the centerpiece of their unexpected journey. By the time Janet Patel returned for her follow-up inspection, the basement was not only dry, but significantly improved. New electrical systems had been installed to code. The foundation had been properly sealed against future water infiltration, and a custom access point had been created to allow continued study of the underground chamber while maintaining the structural integrity of the house. "This is remarkable progress, Mr. Rivera," Patel said, clearly impressed as she signed off on the inspection form that officially removed the condemnation threat. "Most families would have given up when faced with the situation you were in 2 weeks ago." "We had help," Michael acknowledged, thinking of the unprecedented coalition that had formed around their discovery: historians, legal experts, university administrators, and city officials who had recognized that some things transcended bureaucratic boundaries, and we had motivation. "This house isn't just a building to us, it's our family's future." The underground chamber and its contents had indeed proven to be historically significant beyond initial expectations. Dr. Abernathy had assembled a team of experts from various disciplines: banking historians, archaeologists, document preservation specialists, and numismatists to properly catalog and analyze everything found in the vault. The gold coins alone represented one of the most significant numismatic discoveries in recent Philadelphia history. The collection included over 200 double eagles, most in mint condition, with several rare variations that had been previously unknown to collectors. Beyond their considerable gold value, the historical and collector significance of these coins made them even more valuable, with some individual pieces potentially worth tens of thousands of dollars to the right institutions or collectors. But it was the documents that generated the most academic excitement. The Committee of Safety's detailed records provided unprecedented insight into the inner workings of 19th-century banking during the financial crisis. Letters between Harrison, Pembroke, and Whitman revealed how they had become aware of larger financial institutions planning to exploit the panic of 1871 to absorb smaller banks at fire sale prices, leaving depositors with pennies on the dollar for their savings. These men were genuinely trying to protect ordinary people. Dr. Abernathy explained during a presentation at the university that the entire Rivera family had been invited to attend. They knew they were violating banking regulations, but they believed the system itself had become corrupted by financial speculators who viewed economic crises as opportunities for consolidation and profit. The historical parallels to modern financial crises were not lost on anyone. The documents describe predatory practices and market manipulations that would sound familiar to anyone who had lived through the 2008 financial crisis or other periods of economic turmoil when ordinary families often suffered the most devastating consequences. Attorney Goldman had successfully navigated the complex legal issues surrounding the discovery, crafting an agreement that balanced historical preservation with recognition of the Rivera's rights as property owners and discoverers. The university would receive the complete document archive and a representative selection of coins for permanent preservation and exhibition. In exchange, the Rivera family would retain ownership rights to a portion of the gold coins, with provisions for their gradual and responsible sale to provide for the family's needs while avoiding market disruption. Most significantly, the agreement established the Committee of Safety Foundation, a new nonprofit organization funded by a percentage of the discovery's value. The foundation would focus on providing emergency assistance to Philadelphia families facing housing insecurity due to financial hardship, continuing the original mission of the three men who had hidden the vault's contents 150 years earlier. 6 months after their discovery, the Riveras stood in the Grand Hall of the Philadelphia History Museum, where a special exhibition titled Banking on the People, the Committee of Safety and the Panic of 1871 was being unveiled to the public. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a life-sized recreation of the underground chamber, complete with a replica of the vault door and interactive displays that told the story of the financial panic and the three men who had risked everything to protect ordinary depositors. "I never imagined we'd be part of something like this," Sophia whispered to Michael as they watched visitors entering the exhibition space. Their names were prominently featured in the exhibition credits, with special recognition for Emma, who had contributed to the historical research as part of her internship with Dr. Abernathy's team. "It's surreal," Michael agreed, still sometimes, finding it difficult to believe how dramatically their circumstances had changed. The home that had once been on the verge of condemnation was now not only saved, but designated as a historical landmark, providing both protection from future development and significant property tax benefits that made their long-term ownership secure. The partial sale of gold coins, carefully managed by financial advisors arranged through Attorney Goldman, had provided enough funds to complete the restoration of their historic home, establish college funds for all three children, and create a financial cushion that allowed Michael to be selective about construction projects, rather than taking whatever work he could find to make ends meet. But it was the establishment of the Committee of Safety Foundation that had given the family the greatest sense of purpose and meaning from their discovery. Michael had been asked to serve on the foundation's board, bringing his practical experience with housing issues and construction to help guide the organization's work. The foundation had already provided emergency assistance to 27 Philadelphia families facing eviction or foreclosure, continuing the legacy of protection that Harrison, Pembroke, and Whitman had started in 1871. Dr. Abernathy approached the family as they toured the exhibition, his academic demeanor giving way to genuine enthusiasm. "The response has been extraordinary," he told them. "We've had interest from financial historians across the country. This discovery is changing how we understand that entire period of banking history." The exhibition included an entire section dedicated to the discovery itself, with photographs showing the flooded basement that had led the Riveras to find the hidden chamber. This narrative thread of a modern family struggling against financial hardship and housing insecurity, only to discover evidence of similar struggles from 150 years earlier, had resonated deeply with both academic audiences and the general public. "People connect with your story," Dr. Abernathy explained. "It creates a bridge between historical events and contemporary challenges, helping visitors understand that financial systems have always created both opportunities and vulnerabilities for ordinary families." Emma did great during her time with the history team. She was really good at looking through old papers, and even the experts were impressed. She worked hard to figure out what some damaged documents said, and got special praise for it. She also got a big scholarship that would pay for all of college when she finished high school next year. Dr. Abernathy says I'm good at connecting history facts, she told her parents proudly. I never would have found this out if our basement hadn't flooded. The event got a lot of attention from TV stations and newspapers. They all wanted to tell the story about what the Rivera family found and why it mattered. Michael and Sophia didn't like being in the spotlight at first, but soon they saw how sharing their story helped the foundation by showing why fair housing and money matters still count today. Lucas and Jason, the younger kids, got used to all the changes pretty well. They were confused at first by all the people and activity around their house, but soon they liked being part of a big history find. Jason, who was only 10, really liked the gold coins and started learning about old money. The experts were happy to teach him about it. At the museum event, Mayor Williams came up to talk to them. As the city's first Latino mayor, he was really interested in what they found and the foundation they started. He saw how it could help with housing problems in Philadelphia. The Rivera family, the mayor said with a smile as he shook Michael's hand. Philadelphia thanks you. Not just for finding something historic, but for what you chose to do with it. Michael felt proud, not just because of the praise, but because they had made choices that respected both history and today's needs. We just tried to do the right thing, he said simply. Just like Harrison, Pembroke, and Whitman were trying to do in their time. That's exactly why people connect with your story, the mayor replied. In a time when most people only think about themselves, you showed that doing the right thing still matters. After the event, they went back to their home on Chestnut Avenue. The house that once seemed like such a problem was now a symbol of their journey and a piece of history. The repairs were done with care to keep the old style while adding modern comforts. The basement that was once full of dirty water was now clean and bright. It had a special area where visitors could see the entrance to the hidden room while keeping both the house and the historic site safe. The university team kept studying the room, making new finds about how it was built and what was inside that helped tell the story of the Committee of Safety. That night, as the family ate dinner in their newly fixed kitchen, Michael looked at his wife and kids. He saw how much more secure and happy they seemed compared to during their money troubles. Finding what was under their basement had not only helped with money, but also given them a purpose that made them closer as a family. I've been thinking, Sophia said after dinner, about how close we came to losing it all. If the basement hadn't flooded, if we hadn't found that room, we might never have known what was right under us, Michael agreed. It's weird to think that what seemed like our worst problem turned out to be our biggest blessing. Emma, who always thought deeply about things, said, maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes what looks like failure is actually the start of something important. Harrison, Pembroke, and Whitman probably thought they failed when they couldn't return the money and went to jail. But 150 years later, what they did is still helping people through our foundation. Her words really hit Michael. All his life, he had seen problems as just things to fix through hard work. But the past 8 months taught him that sometimes hard times can lead to amazing chances, that a crisis might open a door to something great. The foundation they started was growing beyond just helping with housing to include teaching about money, pushing for fair banking, and helping build up poor areas in Philadelphia. What began as a way to fix their own housing problem was becoming a movement for fairness that matched what the Committee of Safety stood for 150 years ago. 1 year after their basement flooded, the Riveras hosted an open house to show everyone their fixed-up home. The event also raised money for the foundation, with tours of the hidden room area for people who gave to the housing fund. As Michael welcomed guests and told their story, he noticed how many different kinds of people found meaning in it. Young couples who couldn't afford homes in the expensive market. Older folks who nearly lost their houses during past money troubles. Community workers trying to keep housing affordable in changing areas. They all connected with the story about regular people standing up to big money forces that threatened their homes and pride. "Your story gives people hope," said Pastor Johnson, whose church worked with the foundation. "Not just because you found treasure, but because you showed that doing the right thing can win even when times are hard." By the end of the event, they raised enough money to help 15 more families avoid eviction, bringing the total helped in the first year to over 100. Each family helped carried on what Harrison, Pembroke, and Whitman started, protecting regular people from money troubles during hard times. Later that night, after guests left and the younger kids went to bed, Michael, Sophia, and Emma sat in the living room, thinking about their journey. "I was so scared we would lose everything," Michael admitted, remembering how desperate he felt in that flooded basement with the notice in his hand. "I couldn't see any way out. And now we're helping other families find their way out," Sophia said happily. Her work with the foundation gave her purpose beyond just having money. "The Committee of Safety protected their own," Emma said, quoting the words from the hidden room. "And now we're doing the same thing, just in a different time." Michael nodded, thinking about how help and support passed through time from the 3 bank men who hid money to protect people in 1871, to his family now helping people in Philadelphia with similar problems. Different times, different problems, but the same basic idea that people need protection from forces that would harm them. What they found under their basement changed their family's path, turning a disaster into a blessing. But more importantly, it connected them to a bigger story of purpose that went beyond just them. The flood that almost took their home instead showed them foundations deeper than their house foundations of helping each other, doing what's right, and standing up for what matters even when it's hard. As Michael looked at the home they almost lost and now would keep for generations, he knew the real treasure wasn't the gold coins or old papers, as valuable as they were. The real treasure was the legacy they got from 3 men they never met but whose actions still created waves of help and hope 150 years after they hid their money under what would become the Rivera family's basement. The flood that seemed like their worst nightmare showed them that sometimes help comes from looking deeper, not just under houses, but into history and why people do things. The problem that almost took everything instead connected them to a bigger story of courage that now continued through what they did. The crisis that had threatened to destroy everything had instead connected them to a larger story of courage and commitment that now continued through their own actions. As Philadelphia prepared for sleep outside their windows, the Riveras understood that they had become part of something that transcended their individual lives, a continuing effort to ensure that in times of crisis, communities found ways to protect their own, creating circles of security and dignity that extended through time like the ripples from a stone dropped in still water. The bank vault hidden beneath their basement floor had preserved not just gold coins and historical documents, but principles that remained as valuable in the 21st century as they had been in the 19th. That systems exist to serve people rather than the reverse. That crisis reveals both vulnerability and possibility, and that ordinary individuals acting with conviction can create legacies that continue long after they are gone. The flood had receded, but the legacy would flow forever forward, touching lives far beyond what Harrison, Pembroke, and Whitman could have imagined when they created their hidden chamber of protection. And the Rivera family, once on the verge of losing everything, had found something far more valuable than treasure. They had found their place in a continuing story of principle, protection, and possibility that would outlast even the gold coins that had changed their fortunes. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.